to be a co-sponsor with them, but it's really been their idea, their direction, and they've done such a great job putting this together. I'm really pleased and honored to have been working with them for the last 18 months on this. We've been very fortunate to have some great interviewees. We view ourselves at She Shares as having really two roles. The mentee-mentor role, which is very important, and welcome to all the mentees that are here today. And then also just interviewing such strong women who have been very successful in their fields. And today we have a very, very special guest, Gust Brown, and I'll be introducing her in just a moment. But in the past, we've had UC Chancellor Linda Katehi, our Chief Justice, Tanya Cantil-Sakuye, Attorney General Kamala Harris, the inimitable Executive Secretary for Legislation, Appointments, and Policy in the Office of the Governor, Nancy McFadden, and Jennifer Siebel-Newsom, who is a writer, producer, and director of this representation. So we've had just a really great run, and today we're going to have a terrific speaker, but I wanted to talk to you just very briefly what we're going to do in the future. We've just told you what we've done in the past, and in the future we want to make this a sustainable event. We want to gather more sponsors, and we want to move on and probably try to do this in other markets. So move around the state a little bit and really kind of mix it up. So if you're interested in being a sponsor, contact either Karen or Donna or myself, and we'll get you into the loop and help you move into a sponsorship role on this great program. So with that, I'd like to introduce our fantastic guest today. Gust Brown, and when Governor Brown took office in 2010, she assumed the role of First Lady in probably a somewhat untraditional way. She tackled issues that were really unique for a First Lady. She rolled up her sleeves, she tackled the budget. She worked on that 2011 slog through the legislature trying to get the Republicans to join in on a tax measure. It didn't happen. So instead, we had the initiated constitutional amendment, which became Prop 30. And I think it was the doggedness of the governor and the First Lady that led to the success of Prop 30 and really the road to fiscal health for the state of California. And the First Lady is also very, very deeply involved in appointments. She's building a team over there that can implement the policies of the governor and really do great things for the state of California. I am very interested in wanting to know what makes Gust Brown tick. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming First Lady Gust Brown.
Okay, so as you know, an important component of She Shares is not just for us to get together and tell great stories, although that's what we're here for. But we want to share the collective experience, the amazing experience of people in this room with the next generation of women leaders. And so that's why we have young women join us at each of these events as our guests. And I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to call out everybody. If you could all just stand and then hold your applause till the end. We have Angela Pontes, who's mentored by Gail Miller from the Senate Committee on Governance and Finance. Wherever they are, if they can stand. Hello. We have Christine Miyashiro, who's mentored by Emily Cameron from Lucas Public Affairs. We have Kayla Nodahara, who is mentored by Jesse Ryan with the Campaign for College Opportunity. We have Melissa Warren, who's mentored by Jennifer Johnson with Apple, and I want to mention that Jennifer generously sponsored all of today's mentees' tickets. So thank you and welcome to all of you. Okay. You've heard a little bit about today's amazing guest. Gust Brown is First Lady of California and Special Counselor to Governor Jerry Brown. She's a graduate of Stanford University and of the University of Michigan Law School. She served as General Counsel and a whole slew of other very senior executive positions for the Gap. And she is, without a doubt, one of the most influential women in this state. And we're thrilled to welcome Gust Brown to She Shares. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you.
One of the first things you did after the governor was elected, you and he decided to eliminate the office of First Lady, and you were appointed as an unpaid special counsel to the governor. Could you tell us about the thinking that went into those changes?
Well, part of the thinking was just practical, that we needed office space sort of for other people. And the First Lady office space was very nice, but it was sort of, a lot of it. And Jerry sort of liked to have me closer to him, and the First Lady office was sort of far away. So he said, I don't really want you way over there. I'd just as soon have you closer, and it just seemed like a lot of office space. Jerry and I work really closely together, and so we also felt, why would I have a whole separate support staff and that sort of thing? So I think it was just about not needing all of that. I don't think it was supposed to be some grand statement, but I think at the time, too, when we came into office, Jerry was facing the state was facing a $27 billion deficit, and we really did need to cut back on so many things. As we all know, so many things had to be cut, and he wanted to make sure we started with ourselves as well, so we really cut back on the governor's budget in a lot of ways, so that seemed like a practical first thing to do. And then in terms of the First Lady title and adding on special counsel, I think Jerry really, that was more Jerry's thought than mine, and he just feels that we do work together so closely, and that I'm involved in other things. Perhaps, I think I may be the First Lady who's a lawyer. I don't think there's ever been a First Lady who's been a lawyer, and I do operate in that sort of capacity with him in counseling. So I think he wanted to acknowledge that with a separate title.
Interesting, okay. I'm curious in general, we have so many, if you look at Michelle Obama or Hillary Clinton or women around the country who you've no doubt met at governors' conferences, I'm curious if we're ready to move beyond even the concept of a First Lady. I heard something funny on the radio this morning. It was Jill Biden's birthday, and they said it's the birthday of Second Lady Jill Biden, and the woman has a PhD in education.
Right. I personally think we should be ready to move beyond this title, because as I think people know, I'm a little uncomfortable with it myself. I don't know, when people say, what do you do as First Lady? I always struggle with the title, and I think that and we should have soon a woman governor, what are we going to call that first gentleman? We talked about that before. You said that in Alaska, Sarah Palin's husband went by first dude, and apparently Jennifer Granholm's husband went by first gentleman. But I think all of them I think when you have to put it to a man, you already sort of see how out of date the whole title is in some ways. Being the First Lady, and then the Second Lady, I think, is, even more bizarre. But I looked this up on Wikipedia, as we can do so easily now, and the First Lady title first came into being apparently here in the United States, and in connection with the president's wife, and it didn't happen right away. With they struggled with it. They started to call the First Lady, for Washington's wife, they called her, Mrs. President or Lady Washington. And it was funny when we were in China, Jerry and I recently, they struggled with it. I quite often was referred to as Mrs. Governor. And the press found that sort of funny. But I don't think that First Lady title necessarily is, worldwide, although it's used now. I think maybe we should look at other things as we go forward. Okay, well, we'll put out a Survey Monkey afterwards, and exactly. People can give us their ideas. You grew up in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and like your husband's father, your father was also in politics. Rocky Gust ran for lieutenant governor of Michigan with one George Romney in 1962. I know you were just a kid then, but I'm curious. If that's where you got your political instincts, did you grow up in a political household? Well, first of all, my father was not nearly as successful as any of the Browns, so we talk about him being in politics, and I loved him very much, but he never won any of the races he ran for. He did run for both Congress and for lieutenant governor, and he was very political, very involved in Republican politics. Yeah. So I feel that, it was part of the household growing up, but not in the perhaps the same way for Jerry and his siblings, where you actually had an elected official, you know, growing up. My father wasn't that, but I did inherit sort of a love of politics because he was very involved in talking about that, and we always had dinner as a family, and he talked a lot about politics. So I'm sure I got some love of it from that.
And was it a very Republican household?
Yes, except my mother, not really. My father, when Republican, when you talk about it back in those days, it's a different sort of Republican than we have now. I think it's, my father was always very fiscally conservative, but not socially. We didn't have all the social issues that the Republicans seem so involved with now. So when I say very Republican, yes, at that time, but this is something when you look back at Nixon, who he supported. You know, Nixon signed an increase for the minimum wage. He signed the first environmental law. This was when Republicans did a lot different things than what we're seeing today. So in that context, yes. Although my mother, I think, was more independent and on the fence and is more of a Democrat now.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'm interested about your political journey. I read that you volunteered for the John Anderson for President campaign in 1980, the Independent.
Yes.
And then in 1992, you registered as a Democrat so that you could vote for Jerry Brown for president. And
Yes.
I guess
It seemed like the right thing to do at the time.
Having traveled the political spectrum, from Republican, however you define it, to Independent to Democrat, what perspective does that give you over somebody who's, let's say, been a lifelong Democrat or a lifelong Republican?
Well, I do think I've sort of been mostly middle of the road and probably an independent thinker most of my life. I think Jerry is as well, although he's always been a Democrat, though there was a period of time he was a declined estate when he was mayor of Oakland. I don't know how much of a different perspective it gives. I actually do think the parties have changed so much that it is hard to know what labels back then and labels now mean. And I even think for some of the people who call themselves Republican, they come in many different forms now. You know, some that are right-wing and some that are very moderate and open to things, and the same thing with Democrats. So I think this labeling is difficult, and I think you have to deal with each person sort of individually. But I think I feel more of a sense of independence, and that each issue can't be approached from just a party perspective. When you get a big group of people together and you all have to say we're going to agree to only look at the issues one party way, I think you diminish the choices available to you, and I don't think it's actually a healthy thing. I mean, we need the parties, but I don't think any individual person in having to govern can say I'm only going to govern with the Democratic platform or a Republican platform. I think you have to be able to do both and cross over.
Even with a supermajority,
I think so, yes, because I don't know. This supermajority, we'll see how super it is in the sense of many of these Democrats who have been elected are from districts that are not highly Democratic. They aren't, you know, they're not the same as being a very left-wing Democrat. So it's not like they're all going to be on the same sheet. And so I don't know that they're all going to just knee-jerk vote the same way, and so that you therefore have a supermajority.
I want to go back a little bit to your personal story. You went to Stanford where you majored in political science, and I was curious, did you intend a career in politics? Or what drew you to political science, and what did you intend to do with it?
Jerry asks me that all the time. He says, you don't even remember anything from Stanford, you know? Yeah. You barely even knew I was governor. That really gets under his skin. But I'm embarrassed to say that I, probably about halfway through Stanford, knew I wanted to go to law school. I never wanted a political career. Political science interested me, and it was also one of the more flexible majors. So I also wanted to go over to Italy, which I did. I studied over in Italy for a couple semesters, and I did some art histories and stuff. So I actually chose the major because it allowed me to do a number of other things and not just focus on one topic area. So, and then I knew I was going to go to law school, but no, I never thought I would run for office, or become a politician, or a politician's wife, for that matter.
And here you are.
And here I am. So.
Okay. So you obviously had a long and successful career in business at the Gap and in private practice as an attorney. I'm curious how that perspective influences you when you are advising the governor on issues, let's say public pension reform. I mean, you have a perspective, having worked in the private sector, that people in government may not have. How do you braid all that together?
Well, it depends on the issue, how it
Yeah.
comes into being, but I do think it is helpful that Jerry has not worked in business. He's either been in government, he's also been in the legal profession, but he hasn't worked in a business like I have. And I found, even from being a lawyer then going into business, it's a very different perspective, and I think a very healthy one. So I think it helps Jerry. You know, Nancy McFadden also, who's obviously a very close advisor to Jerry, also has been in business, and I think we both sometimes are explaining to Jerry just what that means from a business perspective, which he's very open to hearing about. I think it's just helpful to know that, because sometimes when you're in government and you're only in that perspective, you don't understand the impacts of how certain rules or regulations, when they actually start to have to flow through businesses, how burdensome they could be or not, or how workable they can be or not, whether they're actually going to solve the problem they're intending to solve. I think it's just a helpful perspective to have to live under them, you know, having to done that.
You often hear that California is this incredibly business unfriendly state. I'm curious if you would agree with that, and if so, what you're doing to change it.
I think there is a fair amount of truth to that, and I think there's a fair amount of myth to that as well. When Jerry was first governor, he points out that all of every bad thing you can say about California's business climate was said back then in spades, and yet we've grown so much, you know, since that time, and businesses thrive so much. So yes, I do think there are some regulations and things that have gone too far that we do need to perhaps scale back on. But I also think we don't want to just become like some of these other states that says we just don't want to regulate business at all. Because that isn't what California is about, and I think that part of the reason we have some of the innovative technologies and some of the great companies here is because we actually do have a great environment that we care about and want to support. And so I don't think we should throw away all of these regulations. So it's a balance. And certain things have gotten out of balance, like always. So you need to always be checking that, and how do you scale back some of the things that have become abusive.
Any specifics?
I'd rather not say.
Okay.
But there are a lot.
We
have done, you know, we've seen it all the time, and even the legislature has scaled back on certain things. They're looking at CEQA reform, and I think we do need to do some CEQA reform. How you do it is, you know...
Which is California's landmark environmental protection law.
Correct. Which was signed into being by Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, yeah.
So, you know, who probably had no idea it would be where it is today. So, you know, there are certain things like that I think we should look at.
Okay. I'd like to assess where the governor is today versus where he was when he took office. I mean, California has undergone, I heard it called today the Great Recovery, but unemployment is down, housing starts are up, there's a budget surplus. Is California out of the woods, or are you still concerned?
I'm still concerned, and so is Jerry, and we all should still be concerned, because we really don't have a surplus. I'd like to say we have a balanced budget after a heck of a lot of work. And you know, Jerry really did put his nose to the grindstone and spent 2 years focusing on almost nothing but the budget, and mostly about getting our fiscal house back in order. And it was a lot of work, as it was relayed here. And Prop 30 was very difficult, and a lot of us had to work really hard to get that passed. So it took a long road and a lot of hard work to get us here. But we shouldn't be too exuberant. No one can know. A lot of these revenues that have come in are based on a very healthy stock market at the moment, and we all know that goes up and down, and that a lot of these revenues are one-time, that we cannot run off and start spending one-time revenue on ongoing programs. We've got to hold this budget balance. It was really, really hard to go through that sort of deficit and all the programs we had to cut and all of that. I think we've got to be very prudent before we start up or refund some of those things, because we just don't know yet what the future will hold, and we're not out of the woods.
Okay. You've been called Jerry Brown's conservative half. And I'm curious if that's true. And if so, what way? I mean, you're obviously fiscally conservative, but so is he.
Yeah.
To put it mildly.
To put it mildly, yes. I don't think that that's actually accurate. I think both of us are most conservative when it comes to money, and he is famous. He is very fiscally conservative, personally and otherwise, believe me. And Nancy could tell you stories. But I perhaps have more of a business background, like I said before, so I bring some of that. I think we're really mostly on the same page on most topics I can think of. So I don't know that that's actually true.
He gives you a lot of credit. He normally, he was speaking to the Chamber of Commerce recently and said that the reason he was doing so well is because you manage him.
Yeah, Nancy chuckles on that too, because we know how easy it is to manage Jerry Brown. He's not really one to be he likes to pretend he's managed, but he's not very easily managed. He does what he wants mostly. I think I can speak to him in ways others, because sometimes Nancy will call me and say, man, could you, because I'm like, Jerry, go, do that. And Nancy doesn't feel comfortable talking to him exactly the same way I do. But we do have to corral him sometimes, because he's a man who is really amazing in how much he thinks about things and topics, going back to prehistoric times to now. He reads almost anything you can imagine, very complex things, and he's just always exploring new ideas and new ways, and a lot of times we do have to sort of manage him to what we need to decide today. So, and I can be pretty good at that, but not perfect.
What is the biggest misconception about Jerry Brown?
I think I have sometimes heard, which I think is completely wrong, that he's arrogant. And I have never met a man who's less arrogant than Jerry. And I think sometimes people think that because he's in his head so often, that sometimes people think, oh, well, he didn't notice me, or he was, he wasn't paying close enough attention, or, or something. But he's actually not at all arrogant. He's very open to anyone else's ideas. He does not think he's the smartest person in the room. He's always wanting to know what other people think. And I find him always saying to people, Anne's so much smarter than I am, which is just not true. He's always putting other people sort of forward. So I think that's a misconception about him.
And what is the least understood or misunderstood thing about you?
Gosh, I don't know.
I'm looking
at Nancy. What do you think? I don't have any idea.
A lot of what I read is that you were one of the most influential but least known women in the state. And I'm curious. What do you think people should know about you?
Well, I am not that well known. I will say that our dog is much better known.
Yes, Sutter is doing okay.
And that's hard in my household to get any attention between my husband and the dog. And when I walk down the street, it is true, literally, this happens to me 9 out of 10 times, where people just go to the dog. Oh my God, that's the first dog. Oh my God, how did you get to walk him? I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm just a dog walker. But no one rarely ever looks up to even acknowledge that I'm there, or to suggest maybe that I might be someone worth knowing at all. So, which actually is totally fine by me. I don't complain about it, but it is funny. So I don't get much attention, which I'm sort of fine with. I sort of like to be able to, when I'm on my own and go out and not really be noticed, and it's just not me to want to go be front and center in something. And I don't know why. I'm not shy. It's not about that. It's just not been a big goal of mine.
Okay. Well, then we're doubly thrilled that you're here today.
Yeah.
She Shares is a mentoring program, and I'm curious, who mentored you growing up, and what did you learn?
Growing up, I don't really remember growing up. I mean, I grew up in a big, boisterous family, and I think all of my family were very close, and I think they all mentored me in a way. My brothers were, tortured me quite a bit. They were rough, and I remember when I was young, probably 4 or something, and one of my brothers punched me in the nose, and I had a bloody nose, and I go up to him, I'm all bleeding, I go, Mom, Bob punched me, and she said, oh, stop being a whiner. So I thought, I was really sort of mentored to be like, just do it on your own, stop whining about it, get over it, and especially my mom had 4 of us within 3.5 years, and I was the youngest of that crew. And I think they literally were just like, throw a bottle at her or someone, just. So I sort of grew up very independent and having to make it on my own. That's sort of my mentoring, so to speak. But in the business world, I would say I had more men who mentored me, in particular Don Fisher, who was the founder of The Gap. He since has died, but he was my boss for many years there, and I found him to be a very good mentor. He was just, I was first a general counsel, and he was just very respectful of, he would say, Ann, we've got to do this, I want to open this or do that, and I was like, Don, we can't really, that's not legally possible that way. And he was, he'd be very respectful of what the legal areas and finding a way and not pushing. And he was also just very even-keeled, very supportive, very much, supportive of me moving up in the company, me trying different things. So I just found him to be a very good mentor. So I do think women have to look for mentors, not just with other women, but with men, especially in this sort of world where men still hold so many leadership positions. But I found him to be so supportive of just women or men in general. He just sort of was neutral on whether you're a man or a woman, and he treated you the same way. Jerry's sort of the same way. Jerry's not, I don't see him treating women or men differently. He's just sort of, are you doing the job or you're not? And that's sort of what we'd love to get to in business, where we're not talking about, oh, this is a woman, how do we get her on her path, versus how do you just get on the business path?
I want to ask you about the whole lean-in debate, which Sheryl Sandberg ignited, and obviously resonates with so many men and women. But what is it going to take for us to get to a place where it isn't, are you a man, are you a woman? It's how are you doing the job, not, which women mentored you, which men mentored you. What's standing in our way? You've been in politics, you've been in business. What have you seen?
It's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I have looked at this debate about the lean-in, and a lot of the people looking at it talk about the structural issues that women face, just if you're going to have a family, you're going to have children, all of that. Many, the profession I came from, the legal profession, is just the worst at this. Ever since the early 70s, when they decided to implement this thing called the billable hour, what people do is, whoever bills the most hours brings in the most revenue, therefore it's the best. It's just the worst possible system. I think it's demeaned the system. I think it has the wrong incentives. And so I really had to struggle with that myself when I was a young lawyer. And in fact, when I was first a litigator, courtroom trial work and stuff, and I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. I was going to leave the firm I was at, and they begged me to sort of stay and go try corporate law down in our Silicon Valley office. And they specifically wanted me to go there because they said, we can't get any women to stay. We need to get a woman partner down there. We want to get you to go down there, you know, do a couple years and be made partner there. And so I was sent down to sort of like the canary in the coal mine to go find how can a woman make it. And it was difficult because there were so many things where the men there really did say who got in first this morning. You know, I was in at 6:30. I was in at, you know, and I found my way of dealing with something that I'd come in at 10. I said, I'm not going to fight the traffic. I live in San Francisco. This is down in Palo Alto. I'm not going to get up so early that I miss it. I'm going to just work at home. And so I started to try it, and people are like, oh my God, she's not showing up till 10. Oh Lord, you know. And the big thing was I was wearing pants. Oh my God, you know, she's not wearing one of these power suits. And I remember interviewing one of the summer interns one year and came in and she said, oh, you're Ann Gust. You're the one who wears pants. I heard all about you. And I was like, God, you know. So
like
there were a lot of things you had to break through. But I do think some of these systemic things where, you know, where we care about just how many hours you put in and that need to be changed, and we need to have more family-friendly policies. But I do think women, and I think this is sort of what Lean In, I have not read the book, is saying, is that women do just have to start asserting themselves in ways, or just saying, I'm not going to play some of these games. Because when I stopped coming in that early, and then they realized I was getting the work done, I was working hard. I mean, I wasn't just sitting around in the morning having coffee, I was working at home. I think people, it sort of started to loosen up, and other people had permission to do things differently. And that's what we need to all start doing. But I think it's hard, and I'm actually surprised that still now it seems that there's so few women, you know, at the top of big companies, and I can't really explain it. Or do I have a great thing of, oh, if only this and that happens, we'll solve that.
Another thing she talks about is likability and success, and the fact that likability and success are positively correlated for men, and for women, very often that's not the case. Have you found that in your career?
I have found that a little. I found almost the invert. I would say that to me, men can be complete jerks, and I've seen them and worked for them, and they completely get away with it. Whereas if a woman is, oh my, you know, the words that come out, and you all know them, it's just, and this is, I'm talking about a woman who's not, who's just maybe stern with someone, you know, whereas there's a raging maniac man, and then there's a stern woman, and they're sort of put in the same bucket. And so I sort of find the opposite, that you know, that women take a much harder rap on that if you're just being, you know, assertive. And I don't know about likability. I think I find that there's still, women are sort of judged differently than men. And I found, this was even true at the Gap, that I thought was really open to women. They had more women in senior management. You know, this was a clothing business, so it made sense. But sort of, and this, I don't know how to say this politely, sort of men who weren't that smart could go really far. And yet for a woman, there's just no chance. If you were not smart, you just, you know, you were called just a dumb blonde, or that you would get, there would just be no way. And I remember having this discussion because there was a particular person who I obviously am not going to name, this is years ago, but this guy was saying to our senior team, you know, he's just not smart, guys, you know, and he's running a big, and they were like, oh, Ann, but that's just, you know, that's how, sort of that industry and whatever. And I said, but the woman that we just talked about that you guys reamed is probably twice as smart as he is, and I agree, not that smart herself, but, you know, she...
and you don't want to name names.
Yeah, I don't want to name names. I really do feel that women, you know, and maybe that's changed somewhat. I don't think so. I do feel that women sort of get a different standard sometimes held to them than men.
What advice do you have for the young women who are here today and just starting out on their careers? in terms of how to get where they want to be professionally and personally?
Well, I think, gosh, I don't have any great advice. I think you always need to focus on what it is that makes you happy and what you want to do, and stop thinking about what do I need to do to be successful here? What is everyone else doing that makes them, and therefore I need to do that. Because I've just found in life is too short. You've got to enjoy what you're doing. So if what it takes to be successful in some organization is something you don't want to do, go find something different, because it is not worth giving up your life. And I found that, again, a lot in the legal career, men and women, by the way, who said, I just want to be partner, and they're miserable. They're miserable the whole time. And I said, why do you want to be partner again? Because, just so you can keep doing more of this stuff that's making you miserable. And you find so many people wait too long until they finally go, I don't know what I was thinking. I was achieving a goal that was making me miserable along the way. So I think you've got to enjoy. Now, that doesn't mean that everything you're doing every day, is always blissful and that you don't have to work hard. But if you don't fundamentally like what you're doing now, I think you should find something different. And stop trying to overthink how you get from here to there, and more think about, how do I enjoy life? And how do I get the most for what I like doing? Right.
That's great advice, not only for the young women in this room, but I think for every man and woman in this room.
Right.
We have a tradition that she shares called 10 questions.
Oh, good.
It requires very little thinking.
Let's
just
hope.
a brief one or two word answer.
Mm-hmm.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I would this is completely impossible. I wish I could be a singer. And I am completely tone deaf. So this whole Linda Ronstadt thing maybe has gotten under my skin. I don't know. I wish I could stand up and sing like she does, but I can't.
That leads neatly into our next question. Which is, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
I would, to transport myself from here, to wherever transportation, whatever that's called.
And I can't think of the word. I know
yes,
what you mean. Yeah.
You know what I mean. Not transportation, but transportation or something. Yes.
What advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
What advice? Like I think any of it, youth is sort of wasted on the young, and to pay more attention about how good things were then and that what was going on. I think you sort of, when you're 18, at least for me, I just sort of floated and didn't take advantage of all of the things that I could have. Even in college, I didn't take nearly as much advantage of what I could have because I think you're too young to know better.
Name one woman, past or present, who's inspired you.
Well, I will name, because it's fitting for this, Jerry's mother, Bernice, who was a first lady. She was really very, very bright, and she graduated high school at 14, went to Berkeley, and was extremely bright, graduated very quickly from there, and then went on, of course, to have a family, and was quoted. I read that the governor's office, Pat Brown, actually had to put out a press release that Bernice said if it had been up to her, she would not have chosen politics for her husband's profession. They felt the need to get this out in a press release before she blurbed it out in the public. So I think she's a woman who I always really admired. She's obviously passed away now, but she was had so smart and so many things going for her, and yet sort of had to put most of it aside to raise her family and to sort of follow her husband's her career. And I think she did it with a lot of grace and good humor. So I'm fond of her.
What are the advantages of getting older?
Well, I can tell you a lot of disadvantages, but I won't. I think it's the wisdom. I think the wisdom and the long friendships that you can look back and see so much more perspective in life. And I think that's wisdom and perspective.
Great. What book or books are you currently reading?
You know, I'm not reading a book right at the moment. I finished, so let me think of what I don't even know. Do you have a good book to read?
I'm reading The Orchardist right now, which is a
Oh, I haven't heard of
wonderful
that.
novel.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, maybe I'll look at that. I'm a little flummoxed by what my husband's reading, he's all
Must
in.
be a stack like this.
He has a huge stack, and we're getting ready maybe this summer to go on a trip to some of where his ancestors are from, and so he's reading all about Prussia, and you know, regaling me with these stories of all these wars I'd never even heard of. But I am actually in between reading right now.
Well, we only made it through 7 questions.
Oh.
We're out of time.
Oh, we are. I'm sorry
We are.
because I didn't do one-word answers.
That's okay. They were
Sorry.
great answers.
Yeah.
I want to thank Gust Brown for being our guest at She Shares. To let you know that our next event will be September 18th, and we'll be having former Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm, who is currently a
great.
professor at UC Berkeley.
So I happen to be part of the legal profession as well, and work in a big law firm. And I wonder what your advice is to women now who are still kind of trying to work through that profession, where there's still 15% of women in the partnership of the firms. I understand your advice about go and find something that you really love, but how do we get women into the tops of those roles if the firms aren't, or organizations aren't supporting women, or women aren't feeling happy in those roles? How do we get those women there so that they actually want to stay instead of wanting to leave?
You know, it's a great question, and I really struggled with it. I don't understand why the law firms don't want to change and give more flexibility, and I also don't know why they don't want to go away from this billable hour, because it makes everyone's life miserable. And women have so much to offer, and the law profession in particular is one where you could give flexibility and work at home more, or, you know, with computers now. When I first started, we didn't have computers, really. I mean, we had like some big word processor somewhere, but I don't understand why the law firms don't do it, because frankly, from a client perspective, we're not happy. You know, when I was at the Gap, we're very unhappy with the way law firms are, and this billable hour, and the way that they're managing themselves. So I don't know who's happy with it. It can't be, except the problem is once you become a big partner and then you don't work so hard and you have all these other people generating the revenue. But I think I think it's got to change, you know, or I think when enough good people leave and won't pursue this sort of goal, I hope it will change. I don't know, or maybe if enough of you stick it out and help change it, because I'll tell you, I was sent to go be this partner in the firm, and I ended up leaving and going to the Gap because I just couldn't see my life being a partner and doing this over and over and working these billable hours. It's just not what I wanted to do, and if I didn't want to do it, you know, I went to go in an environment where, you know, it would be more fulfilling. I remember at one point, this is one fight Don Fisher and I had. He said, Ann, you know, I was thinking on the legal department, you know, these law firms do billable hours. I think, you know, you could better manage your department if you did billable hours in the law department. I said, Don, you will have to get another general counsel if you want that, because I am not doing that. I manage the department just fine, and we don't need that. So, but I think it's very difficult. I think the only thing is to stay there and keep agitating and get other people, because there's got to be other people who agree with you, you know, to do something. But if in the end they won't, I would advise you, you know, look elsewhere, really, because if it's not going to change, it's sort of a difficult existence to keep every day managing based on how many billable hours you have. So.
Yes, right here.
Jeannie came from California Chamber of Commerce. You and the governor have had a number of accomplishments. within the next 2 years, what would you ask the next accomplishments that you're interested in? You've got a balanced budget, you've got a new education proposal, lots of things that you've accomplished. You have a couple of years before the next election. What is it that you would like to see?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think an election is next year. But anyway, I would say the way I looked at it is that the first couple years have been spent on sort of cleaning up the messes of the past and getting the fiscal house in order. And what I'd like to see, and I think what Jerry's turning his focus to, is more how do you build the infrastructure for California of the future. And that's in lots of ways. How do we deal with the water problems that we may have at the moment, but more importantly, the disasters we could have in the future? How do we lay the groundwork for the new Obamacare healthcare system and some of that? How the high-speed rail and other sorts of transportation infrastructures, how do we make sure that gets built? Because California is going to grow, we're going to spend a lot. Are we going to continue to just spend it on roads or things like high-speed rail or alternative transportation? It's those sorts of building the future for California so that when, and our economy is hopefully coming back, that we can thrive and that we repair some of that infrastructure. It's me.
Karen.
When you're not managing and walking the dog and advising, what inspires you? What recharges you on a day-to-day basis?
Well, mostly what I like to do is to really get recharged is some sort of exercise, either running or hiking. The gym, the weights, it's not so inspiring, but I go do it anyway. But we live up in the hills of Oakland when we go there on the weekends, and there's a lot of hiking and very pretty, and I like to do that. I like to be out in nature and just not think about anything and hike.
Hi, Ann. I can barely see you. A quick question. I was hoping you could offer some perspective on the media storm that occurred when the president made the comments about Kamala Harris, and perhaps the focus on a woman's appearance in the workplace, if you're comfortable.
I do think there is too much of a, for women in general, in politics or anything, a focus on a woman's appearance. When I was looking up the history of first ladies, it's actually pretty interesting. You guys should go onto the websites and read all the histories of these first ladies because they're very fascinating group. I particularly like this Kate Olson, who was only a first lady for 4 months because she tragically died. She had an illness, but while she was ill, she had all-night poker games at the mansion, and I thought that was pretty cool. But in any event, when you look at the stories of these first ladies, it does almost exclusively talk about when there's any story written, and sometimes you read the history and you say the only known story about Susie is what she wore to the inaugural, and what hairdo and whatever. That's all we know about her. And I'm like, wow, that's sort of sad that, and it does seem to be that attention. On the other hand, and I may be stepping into it here, I sort of thought Obama's comment about Kamala was a little more, I couldn't understand the firestorm about it. I think he was he's friendly with her. He was making sort of a joke or he was just trying to be friendly, and I do think the firestorm over that was too much. I don't think he meant it with any ill will, and maybe some would say yes, but you should never comment on someone's appearance. I sort of don't agree with that. I think that there was too much made of that. On the other hand, there is way too much of a focus, I think, on women's appearance all the time. So,
Donna.
There are a lot of senior women in this administration. I think more women have been appointed to senior levels than any other governor in California. So is that a coincidence, or do you think you had some impact on that?
well, I did have the good taste to go track down Nancy McFadden. Yeah. I did, yes. I did do that. And, I had to sort of twist her arm, didn't I, Nancy? Yeah, she was not interested. Yeah, it is still bruised. So I will take some credit for that. But no, I actually don't take a lot of credit for that. I think Jerry, like I said before, is just very comfortable. You know, it's sort of, I shouldn't probably say this either, but this morning he said, you know something, I realize I enjoy spending time more with women than men. And he said it in the context, there was something he was reading about some sort of locker room guy, you know, guys who were being guys about, and he's like, which is so not Jerry. And so he said, I really have enjoyed the women I've had in my life, you know, so much. And I think that he really does sort of, you know, and I don't think he enjoys, I think that's wrong that he enjoys women more than men. I don't actually, you know, when he said that, it sort of surprised me because I don't think that's true. But I think he's sort of very, you know, blind about someone's sex, which is good. And I think he just looks at how capable someone is. So I do think that's, if you are that way, you sort of lead, you know, naturally, women should be about half of, or more of these roles, especially in government. There's a lot of women involved, so I wish I could take more credit, but I think a lot goes to him.
Over here, please.
I'm curious to know if both of you are obviously very high-powered people. Are you able to disassociate at night or during the weekends? Are you able to leave, either one of you able to leave work behind or are you so totally consumed throughout the years and you're just used to this kind of thing? What do you do to sort of, both of you, just do something yourselves, like go to dinner or something?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I chuckle about this, but I have a husband who thinks that his job is like a vacation. Okay, he's like, what do you mean get away from work? I mean, this is like a vacation. And I said, no, honey, really, that is so not true. It really is. And there's not a person on the planet who thinks that other than you. But he really believes, he loves what he does. So to come home and talk about it incessantly is just nirvana for him, okay? So I, on the other hand, am not in that camp. And so I've actually, you know, have times where I've said to Jerry, stop now, shut up, really, and do not talk about this, and we're going to just read books, or I'm going to read the paper, or whatever. But he can actually let things, he doesn't only talk about, you know, issues in the office. He does read a lot. He does about, you know, lots of topics. So he's just always very intellectually engaged. And thankfully, it isn't always about the particular stuff going on in the office. So we do sort of get away that way. But he really, he lives this 24/7 and loves it. So I am the one who has to sort of find ways to get away from him and the dog, you know, who both are very needy, and just find a way to go get a massage or do something. So it's really more my problem. They seem fine being 24/7. So.
Okay. We're going to take one more question. So let's see. How about right here?
Hi. Earlier you were talking about how, you know, you can have a raging lunatic man and then a firm woman, and the woman gets the heat for being firm. And I was wondering if you had any advice for women who are noticing that, and is there ways to temper it, like, I don't know, kind of manage how you react to certain things, or should we just not care what people say at all and just kind of like, just accept that that's what's going to happen?
That's a very good question. I always found my tool of choice in this, because I would have to be firm, it was humor. When, you know, find a way to diffuse sort of tension. I don't think any of us should think it's okay to be raging bad and all of that. Obviously, if you're going to be in a position, you should learn how to hold your temper, you know, be fair with people, speak in normal tones and all that. So I don't think we should ever condone, man or woman, that. Although it does seem to be condoned quite frequently with men. So I do think you should speak up on that sort of thing. But I also find, yeah, if you can find ways to inject humor into situations. I even found when someone was being a raging maniac, you know, if I could crack the right joke, the rest of the, you know, he could actually, I'm thinking one person could actually almost see that he had gone off, you know, that it was wrong. So sometimes humor, but we each have to find our own way to, I don't think silence, I don't think, you know, I think you should, if humor doesn't work for you, maybe, going and talking to someone and saying, listen, this just isn't appropriate behavior, by someone and pointing it out. But it is difficult, because I assume it still exists in work now, where men can sort of get away with this, where women really can't. So, which again, let's not strive to get away with it. Let's strive to be a lot better and show a better example, because I do think women are a lot better at that in general. But I don't think you should just let it go. You should not be screamed at. So.
Okay. Thank you. All right, now this really is the end of She Shares. Thank you all so much, and thank you to Ann Gust Brown.
Thank you.